The tanker was 2 kilometers off Yalta when the water behind it changed. On the bridge, the duty officer would have seen it first. Not an explosion, not a warning, but a low white scar cutting across the surface of the Black Sea. Moving fast, moving with purpose. Moving toward the hull at a closing speed that left almost no time to think and no time at all to act. By 14:07 local time, on July 15, 2026, the object, a Ukrainian Sea Baby maritime drone, roughly 5.5 meters long and carrying an estimated 320 kilogram warhead, was already inside the vessel's minimum reaction radius. The captain had perhaps 8 seconds, maybe fewer. The footage, released hours later by Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, shows the final approach in full daylight, in full color, in full detail. The drone does not waver. It does not slow. It runs straight at the tanker's starboard side and disappears behind the hull in a flash of white water and fire. The ship, a sanctioned vessel operating under a falsified flag and a deliberately dark transponder, had been making a fuel run along a route that Russia had considered protected. Crimean coastal waters, the rear area, the place where the war was supposed to stay distant. It did not stay distant on July 15th. And the strike itself, as dramatic as the footage makes it look, was only the most visible part of what happened, because this was not a random target. This vessel was a link in a logistics chain that Russia has been quietly building for 2 years. A shadow network of tankers, falsified registries, and offshore transfer points designed to keep Crimea fueled and supplied no matter what happened to the Kerch Bridge. Ukraine had just cut one of those links. In broad daylight, 2 kilometers off a beach that Russians still post vacation photos from. Stay with us to the end, because by the time we walk through the full chain of what this drone had to survive, what it hit, and why it matters to every ship captain now operating in the Black Sea, you will understand something that the headlines alone will not tell you. The safe harbor is gone, and the Shadow Fleet just learned that the hard way. Let us go back to the beginning. To understand what happened off Yalta, you have to understand what the Kerch Bridge became, or rather, what it stopped being. In the spring of 2022, the bridge was the spine of Russian logistics in Crimea. Fuel, ammunition, food, reinforcement troops, everything that kept the peninsula operational and everything that kept Russian forces in the south of Ukraine supplied, moved across that bridge in an almost continuous convoy. It was Russia's most important single piece of infrastructure in the entire theater, and both sides knew it. Ukraine struck the Kerch Bridge in October 2022, and then again in July 2023. The second strike put the road span partially out of service for months. Russian engineers repaired it, reinforced it, built bypass staging points, but the bridge was never again the confident artery it had been. Traffic slowed, scheduling became irregular, weight limits were quietly imposed. By early 2025, Russian military planners had already shifted a significant portion of Crimea's heavy logistics, fuel above all, onto maritime delivery. Not through major naval vessels, which were now targets. Through a loosely organized fleet of third-party tankers, flying the flags of Gabon, Palau, Cameroon, and a rotating list of other registries that asked few questions and kept their AIS transponders conveniently dark. This is what the Western sanctions community calls the Shadow Fleet. It is not a fleet in the military sense. It has no unified command, no markings, no formal organizational structure. It is a collection of aging, often poorly maintained tankers, most of them over 15 years old, some over 25, crewed by third country nationals, contracted through a web of shell companies in Dubai, Hong Kong, and Ankara, insured through offshore syndicates that charge double the standard rate precisely because no legitimate underwriter will touch them. They operate in a legal gray zone and rely on ambiguity as their primary defense. If no one can prove the cargo is Russian crude, if the flag state denies knowledge, if the ownership chain runs through 3 jurisdictions, the sanctions are hard to enforce. Hard, not impossible, and not immune to a sea baby. The vessel struck off Yalta on July 15th had been identified by European OSINT analysts and shipping intelligence trackers in the weeks before the strike. Satellite imagery and cross-referenced AIS data, tracking the gaps, the transponder blackouts, the suspicious rendezvous points in international waters had flagged it as a probable Shadow Fleet tanker, making regular runs between Novorossiysk on the Russian mainland and anchorages near Yalta and Sevastopol. The Kerch Strait route was still in use, but this vessel appeared to be running a supplementary coastal corridor, moving refined petroleum products, diesel, likely, possibly jet fuel, directly to Crimean delivery points along the western coast. When you understand that, the location of the strike begins to tell a different story. Ukraine did not hit this vessel because it happened to be in range. Ukraine hit it here, 2 kilometers off Yalta, to make a specific point about range. The Sea Baby maritime drone is a Ukrainian-designed uncrewed surface vessel, roughly 5.5 meters in length, with a fiberglass hull designed to minimize radar cross-section and a top speed of approximately 75 to 80 kilometers per hour in good sea conditions. It carries a warhead estimated between 200 and 320 kilograms of explosive material, depending on mission configuration. It navigates via GPS with an inertial backup system and uses an onboard camera system, often operating on Starlink or similar satellite link, that allows remote operators to conduct final terminal guidance with direct visual confirmation of the target. It has an operational range that Ukrainian officials have described publicly as exceeding 1,000 kilometers in optimal conditions. The Black Sea is approximately 1,175 kilometers at its longest axis. Draw a circle from any point on Ukraine's coast and the geometry is unambiguous. Russia's naval planners understood this in the abstract. Understanding it in the abstract and watching the footage from July 15th are two very different things. Here is the question that matters, and the one we are going to answer in the next few minutes. If Ukraine has had these drones for more than a year, if the Shadow Fleet has been operating in Crimean coastal waters for most of that time, why did this strike happen here, now, in this way, and what does the fact that it happened tell us about what comes next? The answer starts with what the Sea Baby had to get past. Russia's coastal defense around Crimea is layered. Not as tightly as Russian state media has suggested, but layered enough that a maritime strike in shallow, observed coastal waters is not a simple proposition. The waters around the Crimean coast, particularly along the western and southern approaches, are patrolled by a combination of Russian coastal radar systems, armed patrol boats of the Project 10 Swan-10 Svetlyak class, and helicopter assets based at Saki Air Base. Additionally, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, what remains of it after the losses of 2022 through 2025, which include the Moskva cruiser, the Rostov-on-Don submarine, the Novicherkassk landing ship, and numerous smaller vessels, has maintained a reduced but functional presence in Sevastopol and at anchorages along the southern coast. Against surface drones, Russia has deployed several active countermeasures. The most direct is dedicated anti-drone patrol boats, which are small, fast, and equipped with heavy machine guns, and in some configurations, remote weapon stations capable of engaging small surface targets at ranges up to approximately 1,500 meters. These boats have successfully intercepted Sea Baby drones on previous attempts. Footage has circulated on Russian Telegram channels showing patrol boats opening fire on incoming drones and detonating their warheads before hull contact. The second layer is aerial. Russian Ka-27 helicopters, based at Saki and occasionally at Belbek near Sevastopol, have been used to search coastal approaches and engage surface drones spotted at range. A helicopter at altitude, with a clear sea surface and favorable light conditions, can theoretically detect a Sea Baby at ranges exceeding 5 kilometers, enough time to vector in a patrol boat or engage directly. The third layer, and perhaps the most passive but also the most telling, is the coastal radar network. Russia installed additional coastal surveillance radar along the Crimean perimeter following early Sea Baby strikes in 2023 and 2024. These are short to medium-range systems optimized for surface detection in littoral environments, designed specifically to address the low profile that makes the Sea Baby difficult for naval or air search radars to see reliably. On July 15, 2026, a Sea Baby reached 2 kilometers off Yalta. That is the result. Now consider what it means about the layers it passed through. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces have not disclosed the operational details of this specific mission, as would be expected for an ongoing program. But the pattern visible in previous strikes, combined with the geography of the approach, allows a reconstruction with reasonable confidence. The Sea Baby almost certainly launched from a position well offshore, possibly from a mothership or a forward staging point in international waters, a technique Ukraine has used on previous long-range maritime operations. The approach to the Crimean coast along the western corridor passes through open water where radar coverage has gaps, particularly at low sea states that produce surface clutter masking a small fiberglass hull. At 75 kilometers per hour, a Sea Baby covers that approach in less than an hour from a position 60 kilometers offshore, within international waters, outside the nominal patrol radius of Crimea's coastal defense boats operating close to shore. The final approach leg, the last 10 to 15 kilometers along the coast toward Yalta, is the high-risk window. This is where patrol boats and helicopter assets would theoretically make intercept. The footage suggests they did not. Either the patrol pattern was not covering this corridor at this time, or the approaching drone was not detected until it was already inside the minimum intercept window, or both. Russia's coastal defense around Crimea has been steadily degraded over the previous 18 months, not just by the losses to the fleet itself, but by the attrition of patrol boat assets. Several Svetyak-class boats and their successors were damaged or sunk in earlier drone engagements. Replacement is slow. Russia's shipbuilding capacity is under strain from the war economy. By mid-2026, the patrol coverage of the western Crimean coast was thinner than it had been in 2023. Not absent, thinner. A thinner net caught nothing on July 15th. The tanker, meanwhile, had no meaningful active defense of its own. Shadow Fleet vessels do not travel with escorts. They are commercial ships, old, slow, carrying cargo and a small crew, and their security model is built on obscurity, on the assumption that no one knows exactly where they are or when they are moving. That assumption works against sanctions enforcement. It does not work against a drone guided in real time by a remote operator watching through an onboard camera. The Sea Baby found it anyway. At 14:07 local time, the impact. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces published the footage the same evening. It shows the drone's camera perspective in the terminal phase, the gray bulk of the tanker's hull filling the frame, the white water of the drone's wake trailing behind, the target growing larger with each second until the camera cuts to static. Separately shot footage from what appears to be a surveillance drone overhead shows the impact from above, a flash at the waterline on the starboard side, a column of white water and debris, and then, within seconds, the beginning of what appears to be a serious fire amidships. The tanker did not sink immediately, according to available reporting. Satellite imagery acquired the following day showed the vessel listing and stationary, with fire damage visible along the midship section. The extent of structural damage below the waterline, and whether the vessel was carrying fuel that burned internally, remained unclear from open sources as of the morning of July 16th. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces described the strike as successful. Russia's defense ministry had not formally acknowledged the vessel or the strike as of the same time, which is consistent with the ministry's standard practice of declining to comment on Shadow Fleet losses. What is not in dispute is what the strike looked like from shore. Yalta is a city of roughly 80,000 people. It has beaches. It has hotels. In the warped reality of Russian-occupied Crimea, it has been presented as a functioning resort destination, a place where the war is something that happens elsewhere, something on the television. On July 15th, in full daylight, within clear visual range of the Yalta coastline, a Ukrainian drone struck a ship. Witnesses reported the impact and the subsequent fire. Video circulated on social media, not released by Ukraine, simply filmed by people on the shore. The message was not encrypted. It did not need to be. This is the strategic logic, and it is worth stating clearly. Ukraine's maritime drone campaign against the Black Sea is not primarily a campaign to sink ships. It is a campaign to raise the cost of operating ships in what Russia designated as its controlled waters. The Moskva, the Rostov-on-Don, The Novocherkassk, those were military targets, high value and high symbolism. The Shadow Fleet tankers are something different. They are economic infrastructure. They are the capillary system that keeps Crimea functional, that keeps Russian forces in the south supplied, that allows Moscow to continue operating the peninsula as if it were not a contested war zone. Every tanker captain who watched the Yalta footage on July 15th ran a calculation. Every shipping broker who read the after-action reports ran the same calculation. Every insurance underwriter covering vessels in the Black Sea, and there are very few of them left, at very high premiums, updated their models. The route from Novorossiysk to the western Crimean coast just became significantly more expensive. Not because the logistics are harder, because the risk premium on every voyage just went up in a way that is visible, recorded, and now verifiable by satellite. This is how Ukraine fights a war with a fraction of Russia's conventional capacity. Not by matching Russia's artillery shell count or its tank production numbers, but by identifying the nodes where the Russian system is brittle and applying targeted, visible, documented pressure. The Kerch Bridge attacks made the bridge a liability. The Black Sea Fleet strikes made Sevastopol harbor a danger zone. The Shadow Fleet campaign is making the entire maritime logistics network around Crimea expensive, unreliable, and increasingly hard to ensure. Ukraine did not invent this strategy. Asymmetric pressure on logistics and supply chains is as old as warfare. But the Sea Baby gave Ukraine the tool to apply it at ranges and in locations that changed what inside Crimea means. When a drone can reach 2 kilometers off Yalta, there is no rear area, there is no safe harbor. The operational perimeter that Russia thought it had, the invisible line where the war was supposed to stop, has been erased. What to watch in the coming weeks? The maritime insurance market's response to this strike will be one of the clearest signals of its strategic impact. If underwriters further restrict or price increase coverage for the Novorossiysk to Crimea corridor, the Shadow Fleet will thin. Ships will find other assignments. The fuel deliveries will not stop. Russia will find workarounds, as it always does, but they will become more expensive, more irregular, and more exposed to additional strikes as the remaining vessels consolidate onto fewer, more predictable routes. Fewer routes mean easier targeting. Ukraine's drone operators are watching those routes as closely as the shipping intelligence analysts are. The other indicator is Russia's response. If Moscow reinforces the coastal patrol network around Yalta and the western approaches significantly, more boats, more helicopters, more radar coverage, that is a resource expenditure that has to come from somewhere. Resources spent on coastal patrol are resources not available for other tasks. That trade-off is also part of the calculation. If you want to follow this war as it actually unfolds, the strategy underneath the headlines, the logistics and the systems and the decisions that determine what happens next, not just the footage and the claims, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you are there the moment the next chapter breaks. Hit the bell. Every strike leaves a thread. We follow it. And one final note for the record. This report is news analysis and reconstruction of ongoing, fast-moving events, built on reporting from major outlets, OSINT tracking, and open-source satellite and shipping data, grounded in the facts as they are known at the time of writing. Some details of the July 15th strike remain unconfirmed or disputed, and as the situation develops, those details will change. Stay sharp, stay informed, and we will see you in the next one.